A long time ago, during the late 19th century, a rebellion raged in America that was unlike any other. It was an insurrection full of lynchings, assassinations, and class warfare, a war that pitted farmers and cowboys against the might of the U.S. Army, a war that became known as the Johnson County War. The Johnson County War was fought in Wyoming between 1889 to 1893, though most of the fighting happened in the year 1892. It was a range war, a type of conflict in the Wild West between civilians who vied for control over the limited resources in the frontier. The war was fought between rich and powerful businessmen who wanted to take control of the territory, and the smaller and more independent settlers who were just trying to make a living there. Soon, the American government and its military became involved. The war left many people dead and changed the course of both the state of Wyoming and the American frontier. Before the war, the state of Wyoming was a vast, untouched open range where most of the people made their living by growing cattle, especially in areas such as Johnson County. Some of the most powerful men in the region were rich ranchers and cattlemen, nicknamed the cattle barons. These barons united themselves under a group known as the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. Business went well for them, until a powerful series of blizzards rocked the open range between the years 1886 to 1887, killing many livestock and diluting the pastoral lands. This calamity weakened the cattle barons immensely, which was worsened by the arrival of independent settlers who had arrived to settle in Wyoming through the Homestead Acts of 1862. These settlers were made up of farmers, former cowboys, and small entrepreneurs. They were known as homesteaders, or as the cattle barons called them, nesters and grangers. They provided a fierce competition to the cattle barons, and the latter would attempt to monopolize whatever grass, water, and livestock were left. The cattle barons, led by rancher Frank Wolcott and his thug Frank Canton, utilized their money and political connections to tip the economy into their favor. Their attempts included getting the so-called Maverick Act passed, which automatically made any unbranded cattle in the open range their property. They even hired other gunmen known as range detectives to keep an eye out for their competitors. Finally, false information was spread that condemned the homesteaders as livestock thieves or cattle rustlers. But the stubborn homesteaders never left Wyoming. It wasn't long before the cattle barons decided to use violence against them. On July 20th, 1889, the first casualties of the war occurred. Ella Watson, a local rancher also known as Cattle Kate, was charged by George Henderson, a range detective, with stealing cattle from Albert John Bothwell, another rancher. The cattlemen first sent riders to take Ella, then Jim Averill, Ella's husband. They were later hanged together from a tree. This horrific deed was one of the few instances of a woman being lynched in the Old West, an occurrence that horrified a great deal of the local populace. Soon, more assassinations, vigilantism, and disappearances followed. Frank Buchanan, nephew of Jim Averill, disappeared. Another nephew, Ralph Cole, was poisoned. Tom Wagoner, a horse trader, was also lynched. Jimmy the Butcher, a local entrepreneur, was murdered. George Henderson, the man who investigated Cattle Kate, was also found shot and killed. The cattle barons had complete control over the range, following the deaths of their well-known rivals. However, in an effort to challenge the WSGA, a group of smaller ranchers, led by a local cowboy named Nate Champion, founded the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association. The cattle barons soon perceived the new organization as a challenge to their control over the stock interests. They tried to exclude the group from participating in businesses like the annual roundups. But this didn't work, as Champion's group chose to host their own roundups and markets. The cattle barons soon dispatched an assassination team on November 1st, 1891, to assassinate Nate Champion. Early in the morning, a party of armed men broke into the cabin where Champion and another man, Ross Gilbertson, were sleeping near the middle fork of the Powder River. 4 people stood outside the small cabin, leaving only 2 inside. The intrusion startled Champion right away, and as the shooters aimed their pistols at him, he reached for his own pistol, which was concealed beneath a pillow. A gunfight then broke out. Assassin Billy Likens was mortally wounded after Champion shot at them. Champion was left unscathed. Champion would try to seek justice for the blatant attempt on his life. Following an investigation into the attack, John A. Tisdale and Orley Ranger Jones, two homesteaders, were given access to the names of those involved. Such information would have implicated the cattle barons with the assassination attempt. But before they could testify, both men were ambushed and killed in separate incidents while riding.
I'm standing at the side of the place where John A. Tisdale was killed, and he was killed in a wagon, and he fell backwards and bled all over his children's gifts. He was taking a whole load of stuff back to his home. Well, at the same time, after Tisdale was shot, the wagon was taken down the gully here, and the two horses were shot, and then the dog followed along, and the killer shot the dog too.
Having had enough, the cattle barons decided on one final campaign to get rid of the homesteaders. They began hiring gunmen from Texas to come to Wyoming and help them eliminate their competition. It wasn't the first time the cattle barons did this. According to cowboy John J. Baker, Texas gunmen employed by the cattle barons ambushed and massacred 9 trappers whom they mistook for cattle rustlers in Big Dry Creek. They were paid well for the crime. Overall, 23 Texas gunmen were hired to assist in getting rid of the homesteaders. This event became known as the Invasion, and the people who participated became collectively called the Invaders. Politicians allied with the cattle barons, like State Senator Bob Tisdale, State Water Commissioner W.J. Clark, William C. Irvine, and Hubert Teschemacher, also joined the operation. They made a hit list containing 70 names. Nate Champion, who was at the KC Ranch, was the first person the WSGA targeted. After arriving at the ranch late Friday, April 8, 1892, the group silently surrounded the structures and bided their time until daybreak. There were 3 men inside the cabin: Nate Champion, his friend Nick Ray, and 2 others. The other 2 men, who were going to spend the night on their way through, were apprehended as they emerged from the cabin early that morning to gather water at the nearby Powder River. Nick Ray was shot and killed as he stood in the doorway. A shootout had finally commenced. Champion dragged a mortally wounded Nick Ray back into the cabin as the gunmen continued to fire. A few hours later, Ray passed away, leaving Champion alone and under siege. Champion shot and injured 3 of the invaders during the gunfight. The invaders finally set fire to the cabin, and Nate Champion bolted out the rear entrance. He was shot multiple times and killed. Another homesteader, Jack Flagg, passed by Champion's cabin on his wagon, and after another brief gunfight, quickly rode to the town of Buffalo to inform the locals of what happened. On Sunday night, April 10th, William Angus, the Johnson County Sheriff and a veteran of the Indian Wars, organized a posse of 200 men from Buffalo and headed for KC Ranch. The invaders moved northward towards Buffalo. But by the early hours, word had spread that a sizable enemy force was approaching them. They rode quickly and found safety at the TA Ranch in Crazy Woman Creek. One of the Texans, Jim Dudley, shot himself inadvertently during their flight when his horse broke loose and his rifle dropped to the ground, discharging and hitting his knee. He was escorted to Fort McKinney, where gangrene claimed his life a few days later. The remaining invaders were holed up at the TA Ranch. Although the sheriff's posse eventually found them, the invaders held them off, resulting in a 3-day standoff. Many of the homesteaders were Civil War veterans, and they created one formidable siege. The homesteaders shot the invaders' horses, and they dug pits for cover that surrounded the entire ranch. 20 invaders attempted to flee behind a barrage of fire, but the posse beat them back and killed 3 to 5 men. During the altercation, Alex Lowther, another gunman from Texas, unintentionally shot himself fatally in the groin. Luckily for the invaders, Mike Shanzi, one of their members, was able to escape the barn and make contact with Governor Barber the following day. Afterwards, a desperate attempt to save the WSGA group was conducted. On April 12, 1892, 2 days into the siege, Governor Barber telegraphed President Benjamin Harrison for assistance. The 6th Cavalry from Fort McKinney in Wyoming was ordered to proceed to the TA Ranch at once and take the invaders into custody. Colonel Van Horn, the officer in charge of the unit, negotiated with Sheriff Angus to lift the siege, and in return, the invaders were to be handed to civilian authorities. Johnson County's tensions persisted. On May 10th, while traveling to Buffalo, U.S. Marshal George Wellman was ambushed and killed. He was one of the hired guns who joined the invaders. The 6th Cavalry, who was sent to keep the peace in Johnson County, was also unable to maintain order. A notorious incident happened when some men planted a homemade bomb in the cavalry's barracks and set fire to the post exchange. The bombing in the barracks severely injured renowned officer Charles B. Gatewood, breaking his left arm and putting an end to his cavalry career. Buffalo soldiers from the 9th Cavalry, led by Major Charles S. Isley, replaced the 6th Cavalry. On June 17, 1892, the people of Suggs, Wyoming, were refusing to serve off-duty Buffalo soldiers in bars, barbershops, and brothels. Suggs was a transient, improvised settlement situated next to a railroad. The tense relationship escalated to the point where a disagreement over a prostitute led to a brief gunfight. A group of at least 20 Buffalo soldiers rode out of their camp to Suggs the following day. When they arrived, they started shooting and ordered the town to turn over the individuals who had committed the previous violent act. The townspeople refused and opened fire on the soldiers from behind doors, windows, and walls. The soldiers were caught off guard by the retaliation. Private Willis Johnson was killed and 2 others were wounded. The 9th Cavalry dispatched 2 detachments to appease Suggs following the gunfight. Unlike the last incident, the homesteaders permitted these soldiers to enter the town. After conducting an investigation, the army was unable to determine who was accountable for Johnson's demise. Another soldier named Brown was also shot and killed by a cowboy in a rifle range. Phil Dufresne, a person sent by the cattle barons to assist the Buffalo soldiers, also disappeared. By November, the 9th Cavalry had left Johnson County.
Have you seen my notice? I'm looking to hire some guns. Fella by the name of Snipes wants to take my land.
More murders followed, which finally ended with the death of Nate Champion's brother, Dudley Champion, on May 24, 1893. The homesteaders failed to get justice for Nate Champion due to their financial and political disadvantages. They simply ran out of money to fight the cattle barons at court. However, the real losers of the war were the cattle barons. They failed to kill their targets and were forced to leave Johnson County after the war. The once rich and powerful personalities like Frank Wolcott and Frank Canton folded their businesses and left Wyoming to the homesteaders. The homesteaders remained in the state and took the place of the cattle barons, soon occupying their corporation and the WSGA. Their descendants still live in Johnson County, and they annually remember and celebrate the war that had happened. The Johnson County War symbolized the end of both the open range and the Wild West. It signified the end of the wide, untouched American frontier and the cowboys and gunslingers who lived in it. It is a testament to how civilization had reached the West, and that the American people are not so keen on using violence anymore to settle disputes. It was a conflict known for being a classic story of the poor against the rich. The war is seldom remembered nowadays, but its influence lives on in movies, books, television series, and also video games. The Johnson County War is one of America's greatest and most influential rebellions.